Good evening and welcome. Glad you came for this service. It's a tremendous blessing to have AMA representation here, Brother Jonas and Brother Hosea, and they were sharing this morning and again planned to this evening, so I'm looking forward to that. Open your Bibles to Matthew 28, two real familiar verses that Jesus gave us just before leaving us here on the earth, and he gave us a job to do, finish some, or actually take on some of the work that he was doing while he was here on earth. I'm going to invite you to stand, and we're going to read Matthew 28, verses 19 and 20 together. Matthew 28, verse 19, let's read it. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Amen. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity of this meeting tonight. Thank you that we can do this in freedom. And thank you for the privilege of being your ambassadors here on earth for the kingdom. Thank you for Brother Jonas and Hosea and their companions and their willingness to be here and share and give us an insight of that piece of kingdom work. And regardless of where we find ourselves, I pray that you would help us to faithfulness. In Jesus' name, amen. You may sit down. Just a few comments concerning these two verses. You've thought about this before, I'm pretty sure, about these. We have these two teach ideas, go ye therefore and teach, and then the next verse says, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. And I'm assuming you're like Regina and I, that a lot of emails come through your email box and solicitations in your church mailbox, and then you have them in your mailbox at home and other sources of people wanting your time, your money, energy that you have. And you know, we only have so much of it. We only have so much energy. We only have so much money. We only have so much resources. And I think this second teach should be paramount in helping us to weed out some of those solicitations. Not all organizations are so concerned about this second teach, and that's one of the things I've really appreciated about AMA. I think they've taken this second teach really seriously, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I've commanded you. The first teach is really important also. I think the second one probably equally important. I remember this wealthy businessman approached Richie Lauer one time, and he had some significant amount of money to give. What he didn't have was as much. He didn't have a wide reference on who should receive this money, and so he asked Richie for some direction, for some insight on good organizations to give money to, give a lot of wealth to. And Richie tried to help him do that and walked him through some things. And I remember distinctly one thing that he ended up asking Richie. He says, give me some photos of these folks where they're working. Give me pictures of their people working in the field. Give me pictures of their converts. Give me pictures of their lifestyle, how they live. I said, I want to know what they believe, but I also want to know what they're doing with what they believe. And I think that can be helpful for us. And I trust that the photos or the slides we see this evening will give us a glimpse of the work that AMA is doing. How are they doing with both teaches? Again, I think we have lots of opportunity, and I think we should do, as stewards, we should do the best we can with what God has entrusted to us in both of the teaches. God bless you, Brother Jonas, and Hosea, as you take your place.
Good evening and a Christian greeting to everyone who has come out this evening. Certainly a blessing again to be here. And Brother Ben here read the scriptures that I was intending to read as an introduction, so I'm not going to do that again, except I would like for us to just notice a bit some of the things that were happening just prior to Jesus saying these things. So this was after the resurrection of Jesus. And so those who had put him into the tomb had some concerns as to what the disciples might do or how that they were going to arrange that this resurrection is not valid. And so they paid big money for people to say that he was stolen out of the tomb. And then in verse 16, when it says, "Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, All power is given unto me in heaven and in earth." And then we have the verses that Brother Ben read. So this evening, it is our sincere desire that what is to come forth here tonight, the glory goes to Jesus, to God, the one who commissioned his people, the redeemed, to go out with a message. And this was, in fact, the job or the work that Jesus gave to his redeemed. So this evening, I'd like to give a bit of a report or a history of AMA and some slides, and then also some of the new things that are happening, the new visions and work, and how the work of the kingdom is being enlarged. So first of all, AMA has been an organization since November of 1955, and that is now 67 years. And in this process of time, and I have a few slides here that will show some of these dates. Also, the vision and purpose for AMA was not only to, while we are more of a church plant organization, yet that's not all that we do. So I'm going to begin here with some of the work here and going to try to move through these slides fairly rapidly. But also, if there are things that come to your mind, questions you may have, feel free to note them, and if there is time, we would certainly like to answer some of that. This is some of the goals or the vision, the statement for AMA. Shall be dedicated to the rendering of material, moral, and spiritual aid in the name of Christ to destitute and needy people. The two visions of AMA was for relief work and evangelistic work. Clinics, schools, church planting are the means of fulfilling our vision. So the first work that AMA started was in Germany from 1956 to 1979. And in 1966, I'm not quite German enough that I even dare to say what that first word is. Maybe there is somebody here that can say that. Okay. I'm not even going to try to repeat it. I would have to practice on that. But there was that thing where they had the home for handicapped children, rehabilitation and care. And in 1971, Friedenschaffen, Haven of Peace, and then that was family-style rehabilitation program for drug addicts and alcoholics, a home for stranded young men seeking meaning and purpose in life. And then Belize was in 1961. And as I go through this, I'd like to kind of sort this in a way that of the progress of the work of AMA. So in 1961, the work in Belize started, and it was a result of a hurricane that went through there, and when the devastation happened in that country, and Floyd, I'm sure you know a lot more about the history of this than what I do, but as I understand it, they needed a lot of help, but they were forbidden to come in there with teaching or preaching, as I understand it. But as there was help came in, it kind of morphed into more of those things. So here's the Cayo Christian Fellowship Mission. It's still a part of AMA in Cayo. And here are a few of the long-standing folks that were there. And this is presently, there's Jeff and Denise Mullet and their family, and Melody Stolzfus is a school teacher. Now in Cayo there's a school, and we help to support that school mostly with teachers and personnel. Jeff is actually the school principal. This is the mission house. This is actually not owned by AMA, but we are renting it or using it from Kenneth Krotzer, yes, thank you. There was an addition put onto the back end of that house just this past year. And here is Laban and Zela Kruff. They had actually come from the Hummingbird area and came to Cayo, became members there, and then later the community in which they lived, which is St. Margaret Outreach, became the pastor there, and we were supporting or helping support the school, in which that work has somewhat phased out, but we still consider them, we often give them a courtesy visit when we go there. In the, what we have known, or many of us recognize as the Pine Ridge area, which was 3 churches, Isabella Bonk, Scotland Half Moon, and Doublehead Cabbage. Those 3 churches have now merged into one church, and this is Justin Groff, who is a pastor at that fellowship. Ellis and Kim, Ellis is the bishop, and AMA really doesn't have presence there. They are self-supporting, self-sustaining, and it's really a fulfillment of the vision of AMA is to be able to plant churches and have the people rise up to the challenge and move on. This is now in Hattieville, which was actually the original work of AMA in Belize, and some of the leadership and the people in Hattieville. This picture was taken earlier this year. When we were down on delegation, we had the privilege to sit with Brother Hudell and his wife Arlene and had a very inspiring and interesting time with them. This is Dwayne and Heidi Zook's house. Dwayne's were AMA workers in Doublehead Cabbage, and later transitioned to be self-supporting, moved down to the St. Margaret area where Laban Krups are, built a house, bought land, built a house there, has an orange grove, and does very well with what he does. This is a picture of their guest house. We stayed in that house for one night, I think it was, this past spring. And moving then into the Belize City, this is the Haines Street, where Floyd's have been, and Tim's. I don't know if Tim is here tonight or not. I hadn't seen him this morning, Tim and Deanne. That was the church in Haines Street. That's the mission house, and also Nancy's house and where the girls stay. Mount Zion Literature has been an active part of the work in Belize, and I'm also here to, with some of the new developments that are happening there. We're looking at trying to see how it could work to do the lamp and light courses in Belize. Gary and Rachel Yoder are the current people there, Janice Penner and Carmen Hostetler. This is just an evening out with the staff. Activities, Carmen does, and Janice both, Janice actually is, she works a lot with the deaf and has has a ministry with the deaf in the city and also brings them to church. And Carmen, this is just an activity with the local children. She's engaged in various things of that nature with the children. Mario and Minerva Lanza family has been a long-time pastor in Belize City. And of course, Nancy Koblenz, while she's not there, her name and her footsteps are seen all over the place. And the people talk about her. She has served for
51 years.
50, I was going to say 50 years, 51 years, thank you. The next venture was El Salvador in 1962. And here is the San Salvador guest house. Now, I kept Daniel and Orpha Lapp's picture here. They were in El Salvador in the beginning times, and also just more recently. They served for several years, have now returned, but they were, it's probably 2 or 3 years now that they have returned, and we have just replacements kind of as we can find them to take that place. These are the ER clinic staff, which it'll be 2 years this coming April, where the clinic has closed because, number one, Jana was, who was the doctor there, was requesting to be replaced, and we couldn't find a replacement, and it just seemed like maybe the work of the clinic in El Salvador was fulfilled. And so these were the last ones in that work. That building has been sold and is, we're not really sure what's going to happen with it. Possibly another ministry will happen there. We're not sure. Joseph Miller family is a pastor in Texas, Pequea. And the Eli and Verta Glick, of course, recently Verta passed away, but Eli is still there. And while they were not AMA workers anymore, Eli, when they first went down, they were with AMA and made that their home. And their family has pretty much stayed there. They have a lot of their children, at least. This is Paul and Geneva Glick. Geneva is the daughter of Merle Beachy. Several of the national leadership people, pastors, and their families. This man, Saul Pequea, I think was one of the first ones. I'm not quite sure about that, but he's been a very faithful leader and bishop in the El Salvador churches. Washington, D.C. was another part of AMA's work back in 1965. I don't really have any pictures of that. That also is no longer existent, but that was an AMA venture. Faith Mission Home was in 1965. For those of you that were here this morning, Jose had mentioned that Faith Mission Home was a joint effort between MIC and AMA, and it's still the way it is today. Paraguay was then in 1970, and Luz Esperanza was a clinic from 1970 to 2013 is when that clinic closed, and La Vieza is still ongoing, and that one was established in 2003. This is a picture of the Luz Esperanza clinic. It served for 40 years in that community. This is the La Vieza Church and the clinic in La Vieza. Now that place has a very interesting history, and I don't have time to go into that part of history this evening. This was Philip Beachy with Brother Fisher on a delegation trip. Cattle hauler. This is the mission house. Toby and Mattie Gingrich, he's a pastor at the church there. He would have been one of the converted Amish people in that community. They lived there, settled in there back in, I don't know, was it the 40s or 50s, 1948 to 50s, somewhere in there. The clinic staff, this clinic started, it was a birthing clinic, but no longer is that. It's more of a Band-Aid station for people who have wounds or gunshots or those kinds of things. Towing station, trucks or horses, cows. Kenya then was in 1991. Kenya is a land of diversity and a lot of variety. Present staff, Raymond and Lana Sue Fisher have terminated in October of this year, so they're no longer there. But Mark and Mary Kipfer are there as fill-ins. A new development in Kisumu was the Lamp and Light and MZL work. We've had it in Nakuru for years. In fact, it was Lamp and Light that brought AMA to Kenya. They were asking for people to administer that or to administrate that work, and AMA had accepted that offer. So in Kisumu, just in the last year, we have now opened up an office in Kisumu town. It's just a picture of a unit meeting. And several pictures here of various of the leadership teams. So in Kenya, there are 17 churches, and there are 26 national leaders, and 9 mission pastors, and 3 assistant mission pastors. And what I mean by assistant, so we have the Ryan Weaver, who is our business manager, and then we have a Lamp and Light projects director, and also a Lamp and Light MZO director in Kisumu. So the next pictures will be just some of the leadership teams. Out of those 17 churches, 6 of the churches do not have mission presence. Thomas and Susan Amata, I think the church here is anticipating Thomas's presence here sometime in this next month. So this is the brother that you should be seeing. Lake Victoria is a very beautiful place in Kisumu for just a day off or a time of enjoyment or watching the birds or things like this. Now that was Kisumu. This is now Nakuru side. Marlon and Anna Yoder, they've been there now for 10 years, 11 years, I think. Ryan and Rebecca Weaver. Ryan is our business manager. Andy Lapp is our Lamp and Light MZO director in Nakuru, and Kevin Beiler is our Lamp and Light and MZO director in Kisumu. Jeanette Stoss, who's a school teacher. Mary Croft is a social worker, and Lois Peachy, a school teacher. That's one means of transportation called a tuk-tuk. This is the leadership team in the Free Area Church, which would be the first established AMA church in Kenya. There's no mission presence leadership at that church. This is Charles Matiba, who is a pastor at the Mbaruk Church. I think this was maybe after a marriage seminar. I'm not quite certain on that, but I think it was. This is a pastor's outing where they occasionally will do an outing and do special things with the pastors. The Lamp and Light structure in Nakuru has served as a very positive place for seminars. That's where the CBYC, the Youth Bible School is. And this was I think it was a family seminar or something of that sort. This is the youth, the Bible school program, or they're singing their chorus. This was the Bible school students. They max out at 50 students in the facilities. just a children's class. Often those kinds of things would happen at seminars. It would take the children out for Bible lessons. Schools was another very interesting way to engage in the lives of the Kenyan children. Often there would be 101 distributions or such like that would be given to the children. Or more likely the 25 stories, actually. Farming God's Way teaching was not, it was just a program that CAM is assisting with, but it's actually not an AMA project, but a lot of our folks would take that teaching for farming. That's Winfred Miller just helping with the work in their, what they call their shambas. I think this was structure preparation for a church house. As in every place, there are also those sad times of funerals and partings. Construction site. This was the meal preparation for likely a seminar or something similar. This was an ordination. This is a pastor's conference that was just held about 6 weeks ago. It's a joint unit meeting. Pastor's table. Every Monday morning we have the pastors, the mission pastors sit together and they discuss their church issues, and this is where the decisions are made, how to move forward with various issues that arise. Here's Brother Tony Sunday, who lost his wife in 2015, but a very stable and faithful brother with his 2 children. Thanksgiving time. This is Brother Winfred with his family on the cycle. Mombasa is a very good vacation spot for those who want to take a few days to themselves. That's the Indian Ocean, by the way. These are just some scenery shots of the Great Rift Valley. So you go from Nairobi to Nakuru, and a very beautiful scenic route. This is a place of a retreat that many go for a few days off. Families just to spend some time alone. Visitation is a very important part of the work in Kenya, and just visiting them in their homes or where they're at and listening to their stories and helping them find solutions to their problems. Many needy people, and friendly children. This was after a Bible study. This is an area, Lake Bungoria, I think it is, where they have hot springs. I remember when we lived there as a family, we took little baskets, wire baskets, and put eggs in it, and hard-boiled eggs in those hot springs. Nakudu Lake, which has flamingos. And then, of course, the wildlife of Africa is always a very interesting part of Kenya. Tea fields. Tea is, they grow the black tea and export a lot of that product. And this is the present AMA board. And Philip and Sue Ann Beachy, my wife and I, Ronald and Brenda Miller, David and Susanna Yoder, Delbert and Susan Schlabach. Now, a few things that I'm going to say here is, so in 2020, there was a little bit of shift in the operation of AMA, where that Mark Webb had requested to not be the recruiter for AMA. He was doing the recruiting for all the countries. And so it was decided that we would take that responsibility on the board. And so now we have board members who are reps of particular countries. And that rep would also be the responsible person to be the recruiter for that country. So we have Delbert and Susan is the Paraguay rep. And by the way, we have missions in Paraguay, El Salvador, Belize, and Kenya. And so Delbert is the rep for Paraguay. David Yoder is the rep for El Salvador. Philip Beachy is the rep for Belize. And I'm the rep for Kenya. And Ronald Miller is the Secretary-Treasurer, so most things go through him, and he's kind of the thing that holds the whole thing together. So I'd like to just take a few minutes here then to give a bit of report of new ventures, things that are happening. So like I mentioned, there are 17 CBF churches in Kenya, 12 in Kisumu side and 5 in Nakudu. There are 26 national pastors and 9 full-time missionary pastors and 3 assistant missionary pastors. 6 of these churches do not have mission presence, and there is a membership of approximately 600 people. Some of the new things that are happening in Kenya is there is a new work waiting in the wings in Namira County, which is towards Kisii, as soon as we can find personnel to fill that need. In fact, I actually do have somebody I think that can fill that need, but it'll be maybe a couple months before they can go. and that'll be a new church. There is also the new Lamp and Light and MZL work in Kisumu has been a real inspiration and challenge. People come to that place, they bring their Lamp and Light lessons, they're buying books, they're asking for Bible studies, and some of these folks they say, where's a church we can attend? When are you going to have a church here in Kisumu? And so this is another very interesting part that we're looking into to see how we could provide a church or a place, a spiritual haven for these seekers. Kenya continues to be a land of open opportunity. And right now, if I could pull 3 families and send them to Kenya, we could have work. And I don't know, it's just a real challenge. We have folks on the ground who have zeal, who have vision, and they want to see this work move forward. There's also in Belize, we are looking toward Lamp and Light courses for Belize, and we're hoping that maybe that can come to fruition. We're just not sure. It's a new venture for Belize, and we're interested to see what can happen there. There's a lot of mission endeavor outside of AMA in Belize, but I don't know that these courses were ever pursued very heavily. Lastly, and some of you are aware of the open door that we have found in Seminole, Texas, with the old colony Mennonites. These are colony Mennonites with a population of about 20,000 people. There are many churches and flavors like communities experience. However, there are 2 churches that are a remnant people who came to the true light and are asking for teaching, for help, for guidance. And Dietrich Fair from South Carolina, who has been born and raised or born in Mexico, these are his people. And he came to AMA asking, is there a way that AMA can help? Is there something they can offer to these folks? And so in 2020, there was an exploratory visit made with Dietrich Fair. He was a part of that. And Philip Beachy, Ronald Miller, and David Yoder went, and they preached Saturday evening, Sunday morning, and Sunday evening. Now, there was also a very interesting contact there, which was, Frank Schmidt, who has been a friend to David Yoder. And so he is a pastor at these churches. There's 2 churches, they're about 45 minutes apart. So this past September, we organized a seminar there, teaching, and these folks are asking for teaching on various subjects, but primarily is family, finances or stewardship, church, and school. And they are intent about these things. So this past September, the latter part of September, Brother Philip Beachy and Ronald Miller went with a team of 4 brothers, for the teaching, which was Lee Fisher from Lott, Texas, Virgil Wagler from South Carolina, Kevin Graber from Davis County, and Morris Graber from Bastrop, Texas. And so they had, in these 2 churches, they had 2 speakers for each church, where 2 would speak Friday evening, Saturday evening, and Sunday evening. And then Sunday mornings, Brother Ronald and Philip preached, and in the afternoon they did a session with the youth. And it has been a tremendous inspiration. It's not AMA's plan or vision or purpose to establish churches there, but simply come alongside and to give teaching. We're not sure where this is going to take us, but it's a very inspiring work, and seems to be an open door. And so we're praying that God would continue to show us further direction as we take this venture. I think with that, I'm going to turn the time to Hosea.
Well, I'd like to pick up where I left off this morning. I left you with the story of how we were advised not to go to Kenya, and we ended up going, and I think I said that it was a tremendous blessing for our family. By the way, are the lights, could we turn the lights back on? Okay. The assignment for this evening says stories, challenges, and blessings of the field. And I wasn't sure about some of the stories that I enjoy telling. Some of them are actually pretty, well, they're interesting. They're also kind of sensational. And I am sometimes a little bit suspicious of sensational stories. But the truth of the matter is, there are things that happened, but I'd like to paint I don't want to give the impression that every day that you're a missionary in Kenya is sensational. And I want the Lord to be honored in these things. There are things that happened there that were very trying, and so at the time that we were experiencing some of these stories, we were leaning heavily on the Lord to get us through them. And so as I share these stories, I really would like for the Lord to be honored and for him to get the credit for getting us through them. It was a time that there were times that we were very, very vulnerable. So I'd like to preface what I have to say this evening with that. I was tempted to just leave some of these things out because of the sensational aspect of it, but I talked it over with my wife, and she thought it would be appropriate to just go ahead and tell them. So I plan to do that. Before we get into some of these stories and blessings and challenges that we as a family experienced, I'd like to finish some of the things that I wanted to say this morning relating to the call. There are several misconceptions that I think are kind of important that we understand. And one of them, from my perspective, one of the misconceptions that sometimes are out there is that to leave and to go and teach in a foreign country is a sacrifice, or a family that goes there, the children are somehow disadvantaged by that experience, where they have to leave their friends and their family and go to a completely different culture. While there are sacrifices, there are so many rich experiences, at least in a general sense, that from my perspective, children are actually blessed if they get to experience that. So for whatever that's worth. one time when we were debating whether or not how long we should stay in Kenya, that was a suggestion that came up, that we should be thinking about our children. And to us, that was rather bizarre, because we felt like our children were very fortunate to be where they were at. The other thing that I think we sometimes think is that when we are in voluntary service, that we are somehow disadvantaged financially. Generally speaking, we like the idea of getting on our feet financially. And I remember in 2008, when we were planning to come back, it was in the middle of that, what is referred to as the Great Recession. And I was pretty concerned about getting a job. And coming back there's startup costs involved again. You have to buy new vehicles and housing and all that stuff. And so I was concerned about this, and I wasn't even sure what kind of job I could get. But Daniel Bontrager, who's a former AMA board member, he was visiting at the time, and we were talking about this, and he said, you know, he had the same experience when he had been about my age. He was in El Salvador, and he came home during the middle of a recession, and he said, you don't have to worry about that. He said, the Lord makes up for that. He said he's just seen it over and over again, that the Lord makes up for people who are willing to give of their time. And that was encouraging to me, and I believed it, but still questioned whether that is the way it really works. Well, now from my perspective, I not only believe it with my head, but I believe it with my heart. That's the way it works. And we can't put God in a box and say that it always works out perfectly that way, but I think God takes care of people that are willing to be salt and light in whatever capacity that He asks them to. Several other things that I wanted to mention that I think are guiding principles as we look at the possibility of going. For one thing, don't force something. I think there are people that have a desire to serve as a missionary possibly, or even you're looking at an outreach here. If God isn't opening doors for you, don't fret about that. I think the focus should be on faithfulness. God will work. He will work out the details if you're faithful. So focus on being faithful rather than focusing too much on what you would like to do. The church's blessing, I think that is something very important. The church, there's a lot of safety in having the blessing of the church as you consider possibilities. So keep that in mind. At Faith Mission Home, I do some recruiting for families and administration positions, and so I frequently get to be involved when people are considering whether or not they will go serve somewhere or come to Faith Mission. And it's interesting to watch people process that. I rather enjoy it, actually. So it's a phone call and a conversation, and then people process. And one of the things I have noticed is that people tend to consider carefully. They want to know that God is behind this. They want to know that God is calling them. But sometimes I think they make it more complicated than they would have to. And I've already challenged people that maybe instead of looking at this like we will only go if we are 100% convinced that God is calling me to this, to just flip it around a little bit and just say that we will plan to go unless we are convinced that God does not want us to go. Instead of asking why and are we sure, we should maybe just ask, well, why not? And I think it's legit to ask the question from both angles, but sometimes we forget that well, why not? That's something to keep in mind. Don't necessarily think that everything has to line up perfectly before you consider venturing out. Okay. Now let's get into the stories and the challenges and the blessings of serving as a missionary. When we went to Kenya, we were asked to serve as a missionary pastor at a small church in the village of Rabur. This church had been established for probably 12 to 15 years at that point, and there were about 70 members there. I remember the first Sunday we went there, I was suffering from jet lag. In fact, it was the day after we arrived, and I still wonder why in the world we did that. I went to church and fought sleep, and here was the new pastor. But we had a culture shock. There is a tremendous difference in our culture and in their culture. And one of the fascinating things about that is that there are things that we can learn from them, and there are things they can learn from us. But as missionaries, we're there to teach them, and it's rather easy for us to maybe have the mindset that we have the answers, we hope they listen. And that was something that I had to learn. I still remember one day we were getting ready to host a seminar at our church, and there were going to be some of the neighboring churches coming, and we were expecting a crowd. So I asked some of the church brothers if they would help set up some shade outside. And the way we did it is we bought these poles, trees actually, that they harvested, and they're 3 or 4 inch round poles, and we made a simple little structure, and then we laid some horizontal poles on the top, and then we put reed mats down. Well, I'm a carpenter by trade, and so I was concerned that things are straight and nice and looking relatively, straight. And so when we went to put the poles on the top to support the reed mats, these poles had a slight belly to them. And so I knew that you always put the bow up so that when you put a little weight on it, it sags to about straight. And that is something that is just common sense. And these were round poles, so it was challenging. And so we were trying to twist them, and my Kenyan brothers said, "No, you put the belly down." And I said, "No, you put it up." And we kind of went back and forth, and I was kind of feeling badly for these brothers of mine that did not know that you put the belly up so that things are straight. And we fought this thing, and of course, a round pole, it wants to flop down. But we managed, and we finally got things tied up so that it stayed, and it was kind of frustrating because it just didn't want to work well. And my brothers were just kind of quiet. They didn't say much, and after it was all done, and we had the shade up, and it was nice and straight, I realized that I was actually wrong. The shade would have been just as cool if that rod would have sagged 3 inches in the middle, made zero difference from their perspective, but it just made it unhandy to build. And they had no idea why in the world it had to be straight. And so, yeah, I was like, I messed up. I realized that I was making a big issue out of something that was a complete non-issue to them. And so there were tremendous cultural differences that we as missionaries, former missionaries, still just talk about when we get together. And that's a challenge to work with a different culture like that. In fact, I would say that that's probably one of the bigger challenges that we face, is to try to get that part of it right. We're very time conscious here. Time is almost a non-issue to a Kenyan. Brother Jonas was telling a story today about a wedding that they were attending, and the bride didn't show up on time, and finally it was about, I think, 2 hours late. And finally there was kind of a commotion because the bride, the Americans were making a fuss because the bride wasn't showing up. And but one of the church men said, "Relax, this is the day. It'll happen today sometime." Well, we would have, things would, I don't know what we would do if the bride wouldn't show up until 2 hours late. The people of Kenya are very, very friendly. Our church people welcomed us with open hearts. It was heartwarming to us. But they were young Christians. They were immature in their faith. And that is something that created a tremendous challenge for us pastors who were there, and we wanted to teach the all things, but when someone grows up and they are not taught that lying is a serious sin, they can have that desire to follow Christ, and they can come to instruction class, and they say they want to be a member of the church. But when they get into a pickle, they will still say a lie. And that is hard for us to wrap our minds around that a Christian would be willing to say a lie. But it's reality. And sometimes we struggle with those things, and we don't know what to do with them. Because to us, that is a black and white issue. Instruction class was a big part of our life there as a pastor. And then there was a lot of dealing with issues like lying and drinking and all kinds of sins that, they can happen here, but they're not commonplace like they were there. It's a tremendous challenge for us. There was constant need for teaching and instruction, helping the poor. That was also a big part of our life. Sickness, tremendous amount of sickness. And I have some stories about these things. But the cultural differences, I would say, were at first, they were rather fascinating. But then after some time, you got used to them, and they weren't fascinating anymore. And as time went on, they actually became rather kind of the opposite, and where they were, it was a source of, they could easily become a source of irritation to you. And but to give you an idea, well, when we came home from Kenya in 2009, when we came home for the last time, we decided that we would spend a week in Switzerland. We would basically have a 1-week layover, and we flew into Zurich, Switzerland. And I had made preparations ahead of time to have a vehicle there, And so we got there in the morning, landed in the airport, and the airport was nice and clean. We got out, and the man that I had been talking to was actually there. He was there on time with the vehicle that he said he would bring. And that was not what I was used to. We had lived in Kenya for 6.5 years, and for someone to actually be there, having kept their word, and they have the vehicle there on time, was like, this is great. We got in the vehicle. It had a GPS. So it was the first time I used a GPS, and got out on the roads, and the roads were smooth, and there were no animals in the way. There were no pedestrians in the way. There were no potholes there, and you just glided along in this vehicle that was evidently well-maintained. And we drove around the countryside, and it was beautiful. The farms were nice. The wood stacks were stacked perfectly. And the trains, we did some train travel, and the trains came in on the minute. And it was a culture shock going the other way. And when we were there, I realized that this is where we come from. We visited this village of Trube, which is where the Troyers lived at one time in the Emmental Valley, and we went to church there. And the people acted like a bunch of Mennonites. Bernice and I couldn't believe it. Just the way they acted after the service. They were friendly, but they were a little bit reserved, kind of like we are. The same genes were there, I'm convinced. And it just made me realize that we, as Germanic people, with our genetic makeup, are on the complete other end of our Kenyan brothers who don't have that in them. Time meant nothing. Planning ahead was, why? Why would you plan ahead? And so a lot of the things that we experienced there were related to these cultural and these differences that we had. When we came back from Kenya, I realized that I had changed. Some of the things that really stood out to me were things that maybe we could learn from here, and I'll just throw a couple of things out. There were ordinations happening in Kenya. The first ordination, I think, happened about a month after we went to Kenya. Eric Ogwe from Kasango was ordained as a pastor. I think there was one other one before that. Collins, I think, was before that. And so we went to that ordination, and during the course of our time there were 12 others. Their ordinations were joyous occasions. They were enthused about the fact that they had reached the point that there could be an ordination and a national pastor could be ordained. When the voting happened and the names were given, there was happiness, and there were congratulations after the service. And after the ordination, there were high fives. I think still there might be that happening. And so ordinations were joyous occasions. A month or so after we came back from Kenya, we attended a service where the votes were taken and the names were given for those that were in the lot, and it was like a funeral, maybe a little worse even. And I realized that, yes, I guess I have changed, because I actually struggle with being a little bit disgusted by the whole thing. Let me throw that out as a challenge. It doesn't have to be quite as sorrowful an occasion as it is. Just think about it. I actually appreciate our culture a lot. But that's something that maybe, I don't know, maybe we could learn something from that. And there were many other things that were like that. I had a good friend there whose name was Tom Boya. And Tom was a dedicated Christian. He has left the church for reasons that I don't know, but I felt like Tom was sincere as a Christian there. And one of the things that we experienced there was a lot of sickness. Malaria was a big thing. And malaria is something that you get from a mosquito bite, and children die from it. So Tom, I think they had lost their fourth child to sickness of some kind or other. And I remember one day their child had died, and I went back to their house, and I was actually helping Tom dig the grave for his child. And we were talking there, and Tom was a man who understood what it was like to have a lot of trials in life. And we were talking there, and he told me, he said, "You know, Pastor, storms of life will be there." He said, "You will have storms, but," he said, "every storm has a beginning and it has an end." And this man who had experienced a lot of storms in life, he told me something that day that has impacted me. And sometimes when we are in the middle of a storm, we think it's never going to end, but that is the nature of a storm. And my Kenyan brothers taught me so many things like that. They experienced a lot of hardship, and through that hardship, they could teach us so many things. As I mentioned, sickness was a big part of what we were involved in there. HIV, AIDS, took many people's lives. And when someone was sick with HIV/AIDS, it was usually just a matter of time until they would get thin and pass away. And there were quite a few of our church brothers and sisters that were positive, and that was something that we dealt with. It was heartrending to see them waste away and die and leave their children as orphans. Now, about the time that we got there, there was a drug developed that would basically it wouldn't cure them, but it would stop the disease, and they could actually live with it. And so there weren't as many funerals, but we still had a lot of funerals that we went to. We had some very bonding experiences with our brothers and sisters that lost loved ones. Funerals were a time that we really interacted with the culture. And superstitions were a big part of the funerals there. When there was a funeral, people feared the dead. That was something that we tried to help our church people through. And one story that I'd like to relate as it relates to the superstitions and the culture there. They used to believe that when someone died, it was very important to honor the dead because they believed their spirits were still around. And so there were certain things that they had to do, and before Christians came around, these practices were clearly ungodly practices. But then when Christians came around, they taught them that these are bad things, but we're going to replace it with Christian things. And so there was this challenge there that they were still being superstitious, but they were doing Christian things with what they believed. And so one of the things was that you had to pray before you dig a grave. And so I was with one of the brothers from church soon after we got there, and there was a funeral coming up, one of his relatives, and we went there and we talked about the plans for the funeral, and then we left. And as we were driving away, he said, "Oh, we forgot to pray." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "No, we have to go back and we have to pray by the grave." And so I was new. I didn't know what that meant. And so I turned the vehicle around. We drove back and we got out and we walked over to the place there beside the house where they were going to have the burial. And he looked at me and he said, "Pray." And I didn't know what the prayer was for. I didn't know what I was doing, but I prayed. And we had a prayer there. And then we left, and everything was fine. We had prayed by the gravesite. And so we started asking questions, and as pastors there in Kisumu, we talked about it, and we realized that this was a replacement for some of the other superstitions that they used to do. And so we thought we probably should be getting them past that and helping them to get past this fear that they have of doing everything right at the time of a funeral. So we had a discussion, and we decided that we would help them try to get past that. And there was some resistance to the idea, but we talked about it with them, and we told them that we don't have to fear. We don't have to pray at a certain time or something bad will happen. And they kind of understood it, but they weren't quite sure about it. But anyway, sometime after that, a funeral came up. And I had explained it to our brothers, and now it was time to dig the grave, the day before the burial. And there were quite a few of our church brothers there, and there were a lot of clan members there as well. And everybody knew that the pastor needs to pray before we dig the grave, or something bad will happen. And there was somewhat of a face-off there. We went out there, and my brothers were there, and the clan members were there, and they picked the spot out for the burial to happen, and it was time to dig. But there had not been a prayer offered. And so people got a little fidgety, and they looked to me, and I didn't do anything. And finally, one of the church brothers said they would like for you to pray. And then I said, "Well, you remember we had decided that we would not necessarily have to pray. We don't have to be afraid that something bad is going to happen." And I knew that I could go and pick up the digging djembe and start digging, but I wanted them to do it. And I had no fear of digging a hole without a prayer, but they did. It was a big deal to them. And so we waited there. And after a bit, Jorim Juma steps up pulls up his pant legs and grabs the djembe and starts digging. And he just made a nice outline of the grave, and they broke through. And the clanspeople stood around, and they were looking with amazement at this foolishness. In their mind, this was a bad idea. But I feel like there was a breakthrough with that, where they recognize that you don't have to fear. And fear is a tremendous problem there. The devil uses that fear to get people to do things that are ungodly. And so that was a big thing that we dealt with. A couple of stories about the Lord's protection over us while we were there. There was a day that we were planning to have Bible study. We had Bible study every Wednesday afternoon. And I mentioned one of the things that we, with our culture, we are very logical people. We can sit and debate things, and we want it to make sense. And if it makes sense to us, that flies. If we can explain something that makes sense, that flies. But in Kenya, it is not really important for something to make sense. That doesn't make sense to us. But to them, that makes sense. It makes sense to them that not everything has to make sense. And for us, we just can't wrap our mind around that. It has to make sense. Now, we believe in spiritual things, but in everyday life, it has to make sense. And so keep that in mind as I say this story. We had planned to have Bible study at William Ondeo's house, and he lived on one side of the church, and there were people that lived on the other side of the church that wondered if I would be willing to pick them up and take them to Bible study with my vehicle. So I said, sure, you meet me at a certain spot past the church house, and I'll pick you up and take you to William's house. So Wednesday afternoon, a little bit before 2 o'clock, I was on the road to pick them up. And when I approached our church house, there I saw ahead that there was a large crowd of people right by our church house and out on the road. And our church house was right off of the main road there. And I wasn't sure what's going on, but it doesn't take a lot to get people to congregate and see what's going on. But there was an accident there, and a semi-truck had a head-on collision with a matatu, a public service, public transportation van. And they used to overload those vans. And there were 9 people that were dead by this head-on collision. 9 people had died. And it happened to be on the day that a half a mile down the road was the village of Rabur, and this was their market day. So a lot of people from the area had come to the market that day, that Wednesday. And so when this accident happened a half a mile down the road, the people left the market and they flocked down to see this horrific accident that had happened. Just before I got there, there was a drunk man that got up on the road. The road was a little higher than the sides, and he addressed the people. And there were probably close to 1,000 people there. And he said, the reason this accident is happening is because of this church right here. Now, to us, that's completely illogical. There's zero logic to that. There were potholes in the road and reckless drivers, and I'm not sure what caused the accident, but the church being there had nothing to do with it. But to the Kenyan mind, they kind of believed it, and they were emotionally stirred, and it had some effect on the crowd. And so here I came in my vehicle, and our vehicles were marked, and being a white person, people knew who I was. And as I drove up through the crowd there, the traffic was actually moving slowly, and I noticed that some people were pointing and actually kind of yelling at me, but I didn't know what was going on. I was trying to figure out what is going on here, and I saw a lot of activity and bodies laying around, and I'm not sure if I saw bodies, but there was a lot of it looked like chaos. I went on down the road, got the people. They got in my van, and as we turned around and approached, I heard them talking about the fact that the crowd is blaming the church for this. But by now I had gotten back, I was almost at the crowd, and I realized that we were in danger, and I didn't know what to do. So I asked Barak, one of the brothers that was with me, I said, should we be going through here? Is this safe? And he was hesitant, but he said, just go. I mean, we were there. We were basically there already. He said, just go. The police are there, he said. So I hit the power lock button, and we went slowly through the people, and I thought we would just drive through and we'd be on our way. Well, when we reached the very middle of that crowd of people, the semi-truck in front of me stopped, completely stopped. And we were right behind him. There were people on both sides, and there was nothing I could do. We couldn't go forward, we couldn't go around him, we couldn't back up, and I realized we're just trapped. And so then I saw a group of young boys down off to the side. They looked up and started pointing and shouting at us. And there was a policeman right beside our vehicle, and I thought, well, surely he'll keep them from doing something. But they came up and they attacked the vehicle. They started pounding on the outside of the van, and it was terrifying. And the people in the van started praying out loud. It was mostly women, and they cried out to God, and Barak, the man on the passenger seat, he tried to get out of the vehicle because he was gonna settle things here. These were his people, and he was gonna go talk to them. But I had hit the power lock button, and he couldn't get out. And then the rocks started flying. First, there was a chunk of asphalt that went sailing past my window, and then they came through the window. And I realized that there's nothing we can do. But at the last possible minute, the traffic started moving. And we literally just drove out of it. It was like the Red Sea had just parted for us. And it was a horrific experience. It was a scary experience, but to me, it was like the Lord was there, and he knew exactly what was going on, and he just parted the waters for us. And I wondered, why did the Lord let that happen? But I think that it really spoke to the people. They threatened to burn the church house that evening, but it didn't happen. We went on and we had a very fervent prayer meeting that day. And it drew the church together, but it really, I feel like it taught us that the Lord will protect us. It was just actually a good experience in some ways. There were other times, numerous other times, that it was clear that the Lord was protecting us. There was violence during the 2007 election. Some of you were there. We felt the presence of God keenly during that time. And it was a blessing. You know, if we would have been able to pick whether or not we had to go through those experiences, we certainly would have picked not to. But when you are in an experience like that and you're forced to go through it, you can see the powerful hand of God at work. And so those were some of the things that we experienced. Unit life was a rich experience for us. We were there with 7 other families, and while each one of us had our specific role with a church, in the evenings we were generally there, and we had family away from home. That was a rich experience for us. Even now, when we get to see some of those people, we pick up where we leave off, and it's been a real blessing. It's time to close here. I would just like to close with another story that I hope will be a means of encouragement for those of you that are maybe considering going with the outreach, or possibly in the future, if you consider doing something that takes some courage. We can't always see the full way to the end. In fact, a lot of times you can't. If you're thinking about an outreach, you might not even know for sure where are you going to be, and what kind of job will you be able to get, and what will this church look like in 15 years from now. There's no way that you can know that, but if you are willing to step out in faith and have, you believe that God is with you, He will be there for you. Kenya had dry season, and it also had rainy season. And one time during the rainy season, we wanted to go to one of our church sisters, our church ladies who was a widow. Her father had passed away, and she had been there for a couple of weeks. It was several hours away, and some of the church people wanted to go see her. So I said, let's go visit her and encourage her. And we set a time, a certain day, and I had a Land Cruiser there that I was driving, 4-wheel drive Land Cruiser, and I think we took, my wife and I think there were 9 others, for a total of 11 people in a vehicle that we would probably consider to be a 5-passenger. In the back, we had set it up for some people, but yeah, we crowded 11 people in there, and we headed down the road, and having a good time. People were enjoying the ride until we came to a spot in the road where it was a dirt road, and it was terrible. The road had washed out, but it was one of the main roads, and buses were using it, and so eventually there were vehicle-sized ruts in the road. Literally, I would say 4 feet deep, and banks on both sides. The buses had pushed the dirt up on the side, and it was crooked, and there was water in it and mud, and there was a stretch of road like that was probably a quarter or to half a mile long, and we had to go through there or then go back home. And we stopped and we evaluated whether or not we do it. And I was the driver, and I imagined going halfway and getting stuck, and then what? I didn't know what the wise thing was to do. It would have been terribly disappointing not to make it to our destination. And we stopped and we debated, and some people thought we should try it, some people thought we shouldn't. But all the way at the end, we could see there was a bus that was stuck. And we thought it looked like possibly you could get around the bus, but we weren't sure. And we weren't trusting the information from people that were there, and eventually it looked like most of the vehicles had kind of cleared out, and we decided we're going to try it. And it was a situation where when you commit, you cannot back out. You just give it all you got. And so we started in. I put it in four-wheel drive, and we went, and the water and the mud flew, and there were times that we thought we were doing okay, but then we came to a particularly bad spot, and we were leaning, and at one point I thought, man, we're going to tip this thing, but then I realized there's no way we're going to tip because there was a wall of mud and dirt here, and we would just go against the dirt. And anyway, partway into it, my passengers started chanting, and they said, "Go, Pastor, go!" And then we would get to a patch that was a little bit better, and it seemed okay again, but then soon it was bad again. And the mud was flying, and there were times we were almost stuck, and then we'd get going again, and all the time they were just saying, "Go, Pastor, go! Go, Pastor, go!" And the emotions were running pretty high, and finally we were halfway through, and then we kept going, and we kept looking at the bus ahead, and I didn't know, are we going to get there, and then we have to stop. And it didn't look too good, but then as we got closer, I thought it looked like there's at least a possibility of getting around it. And finally, we were there. We had pretty much made it to the end, but I had to make a snap decision. Do I go for the ditch and try to go around this thing, or do I stop? The ditch looked really scary, but I decided I'm going to go for it. And some of them were saying, "No, Pastor, no," and some were saying, "Go, Pastor, go." Well, I decided to go, and we made it through that ditch and out the other side. And the people that were sitting on the side watching this whole thing, they were cheering, and the people inside were cheering, and we made it. We made it. And when I go back to Kenya, the people still talk about that ride and the "Go, Pastor, go" chant. And, you know, there's a lesson in this. Sometimes it looks very difficult. The road ahead, we're not sure, are we really going to make it? Is this really going to work out? But it takes a measure of faith. I'm not saying that you should do foolhardy things, but when you discern that the Lord is behind it, don't let the mud puddles stop you. Keep going and put all your energy behind it. God will take you there. And I guess I just like to maybe liken that to your church outreach here. I think, I'm not even sure quite where it's at, but don't be discouraged by obstacles that come up. If you discern that the Lord is behind it, He'll make a way for it. So, yeah, I'd just like to close with that. One more thing. I was just back my wife and I had the privilege of going back to Kenya about 2 months ago. And we went there to help teach at a pastor's conference. And we had not been back for 12 years. And I will admit that I was struggling with being somewhat cynical and discouraged when we left Kenya because of all of the challenges we were facing and the unfaithfulness among people. But we went back there, and I was greatly encouraged by what I saw there. There were pastors there that had been faithful for 15 years, and they had experience And they were still serving the Lord, and they were teaching the all things to other people. And I saw that God is here. God is working. And it was just a tremendous blessing for me to go there and to see that great encouragement. I'm going to turn the time over to.
Well, thank you, brothers, for coming this morning and evening. I think you served us well in telling us what AMA is like, and you encouraged us to think about. It's been a blessing. I don't know that we even planned it this way originally. In fact, we tried to get Jonas here for almost a year, I think, and he finally came. But it's been encouraging for me how this dovetailed with the whole church plant initiative, and Manny's being committed to going, and us needing some more commitments before it actually takes off. But I really appreciated. One of you had mentioned this thing of just focusing on being faithful where we're at right now, and God will open doors for faithful people, and that's who we want to be. And when He opens the doors, hopefully we'll have the courage to walk through it. I think it's time to close, and so I guess maybe I should at least ask if there's some burning questions that someone has that you want to ask these brothers. We'll give you a little time if there is.
Go, man, go. Well, the other one is you said that if we do have an outreach, there's going to probably have to be some ordinations. I can't wait to high-five some people.
I thought of something. It was in relation to Omar's devotions and in what Hosea said about devotions, about ordinations. I remember being in an ordination once. So Omar reminded us this morning that we should become like little children. And this was a local ordination in the States, where the young fellow's father was nominated, and he did this right in front of everybody in the church. And so I thought about that. We are to become like little children in some ways, at least. Anything else you want to say?